Welcome back to Book Break. In this video, we're going to talk about a bunch of modern classics that you wish you could have studied at school. And I actually loved English literature at school, but even I can agree that it's possible the English curriculum, at least when I was growing up, was fabulous. I loved reading all that Jane Austen, but possibly a little stale. It was very, very white, it was, other than Jane Austen, very male, and it was very traditional. We always did one little module on modern literature, but it was mostly classics. And I love a lot of classics, but they're not necessarily the best way in to reading for someone who isn't already a big reader. So if I was going to design a brand new English literature school curriculum made up of modern classics that I think are wonderful, these are the books that I would put on that list. And obviously this is just my very subjective list, so I'm of course going to miss out some of your favourites. I would love to hear any of your recommendations. Do put any books in the comments below that you think would have been brilliant to study at school. Right before we get started, I do just want to mention that a lot of these books might contain themes or scenes that you personally think are inappropriate for a teenager to be reading. They might have swear words in them. So if you're looking to buy these books for a teenager and you have your own personal guidelines of what you think your teen should be reading, then please do look that up, because I can't guarantee that anything on this list will fit your own personal guidelines. A lot of these books do have quite adult content in them, but I think that these days teenagers get exposed to so much of that anyway, it's quite useful to explore it in literature. And anyway, unlike films, books don't have age ratings, so it's a much more subjective choice. So with that disclaimer said, let's dive in. Annie John by Jamaica Kincaid is a classic coming-of-age story, really perfect for school-age children who are going through that exact same growing up experience themselves. It's about a young girl growing up on Antigua, living this completely idyllic life until she hits her teenage years, and some parts of her life begin to change in mysterious ways that she can't quite understand. She finds herself starting to question the assumptions of people around her. She finds herself instinctively rebelling against authority at school, and most confusingly to her of all, her beloved mother starts to take on the unfamiliar role in her life of adversary. So the book is really about loss of childhood and the sorrow that comes with that, and I would have loved to read that at school. Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro has a kind of similar theme, but this one brings in a touch of sci-fi. So it's about a group of children growing up in a mysterious boarding school, and it's only halfway through the book that the purpose of this school is revealed, so I don't want to say too much more because I don't want to give any spoilers. It's a really good book to go in with no preconceptions about it, but it is another coming-of-age story that's all about running out of time. This book also explores in a really interesting way what it means to be human, which leads me perfectly to my next recommendation, Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. So in this book, we jump around between a few different time periods, including a present day when a mysterious flu virus starts to sweep the world. Yikes, eerily familiar, but this was actually written years pre-COVID, and 15 years into the future when a group of travelling actors are trying to keep art alive after the apocalypse. So I can imagine so many really great classroom chats about this one. For my next book, I'm going to say reading, we all agree, should be a joy, right? And a lot of people were put off reading at school by being set endless, very, very serious books. So I think at school we should read some comedies. And yes, we did read some of Shakespeare's comedies, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say those aren't necessarily the most accessible or laugh out loud hilarious for new readers. So that's where this comes in. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. This is a sci-fi comedy that is completely absurd and ridiculous, but also explores very interesting questions about the meaning of life that you could definitely set an essay around. There's also so many different adaptations. It actually started as a radio show, then became a book series, then has been turned into various different film adaptations, so comparing and contrasting those could also be another really interesting piece of homework. Oreo by Fran Ross is another very funny one, but with a slightly more inappropriate sense of humour, so maybe this is one for the sixth formers. This is a very loose Theseus and the Minotaur retelling, so you get to teach a bit of Greek mythology in there as well. And this book really plays with style and plays with words, so a great one to showcase various forms of modern literature, and also a really good one to read in a classroom. It's got so many references in it that I really wished I had a teacher with me when I was reading it to help explain all of them. And then another Greek myth retelling, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This is a retelling of the story of the Trojan War and the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus, who have variously been presented as friends, as cousins, as lovers. In this book, Madeline Miller explicitly presents them as lovers. It's really beautifully written and massively emotional, and it has become a huge sensation on TikTok. Younger readers are just falling in love with this book, so I bet you'd have no trouble getting them to do their homework if this was the book they were studying. For some historical fiction, I would have loved to have studied Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is the story of a young black woman who is thrown back in time to meet her own ancestors, a free black girl living on the edge of a plantation and the white boy who stands to inherit that plantation. So every time she's thrown back in time, she finds them a few years older and she finds herself stuck there for longer and longer. It's a wonderful book and a really great way to teach some of the harrowing history of slavery. Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi is a graphic novel, and I think it would have been so cool to study a graphic novel in English at school and to see some of the different ways the format can be used. So this book is autobiographical. It's about the author's childhood growing up in Iran, moving as a teenager to Europe, and then her return later in life to Iran. And it's also a really great way to learn some history. A lot of the Iranian history in here I hadn't known about before reading the book, so it could provoke some really interesting conversations, as well as some discussions about cultures in different countries. The blurred lines between public and private life is a topic that's becoming increasingly relevant and increasingly difficult to manage for young people today. So Trumpet by Jackie Kay, which very much explores this topic, would be a great choice for an English set text. It's about a fictional famous jazz musician who is discovered after his death to have been a trans man, something which was a secret from everyone except his wife. Even his son didn't know. So it's about his son processing his emotions after this discovery and, in his initial anger, colluding with a tabloid journalist. In Cassandra at the Wedding by Dorothy Baker, Cassandra is a young gay woman, a grad student at Berkeley, who is on her way home to attend the wedding of her identical twin sister, a wedding she is hell-bent on sabotaging. So the book's sort of a blend of tragedy and comedy, and it's got some really complex exploration of emotions, of Cassandra struggling with her feelings about her relationship to each member of her family and her feelings about her own life. Then I've got a nice short one, Passing by Nella Larsen. So the book The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett has been so popular recently that I really wish I'd studied this book at school, the book that The Vanishing Half was based on. The book is about two childhood friends from Harlem who reunite later in life and find that they're living very different lives. One of them is very involved in her black community, the other is passing as a white woman and is married to a racist man. It's a very quick read, it's a novella, but with so much you could pull out in an English classroom. So the Patrick Melrose series by Edward St. Aubyn is a semi-autobiographical series about a man's descent into drug addiction while recovering from the trauma of sexual abuse as a child. Again, very much for sixth formers rather than younger students. Not a topic to be approached lightly, but these books are so beautifully written. They manage to be at once appalling and funny, and contains such a razor-sharp depiction of suffering. So any students who found themselves uninspired by something like Hamlet might find themselves instead very moved by this series. And then I finished off my list with two non-fiction titles, because I don't think we ever really studied non-fiction books in English at school, and I think it would have been really cool. So W3 is a memoir about Betty Howland's time spent on a psychiatric ward, so it's a very frank account of mental illness. And it would also provide some really interesting discussions when you look at the story around the book. So Betty Howland was once this incredibly exciting and promising new writer who then vanished into obscurity, only recently to be rediscovered. And then finally, I've got The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. So we always loved having ethical or philosophical debates at school, and this book will provoke a ton of those. It's the true story of a poor black tobacco farmer called Henrietta Lacks, whose cancer cells were taken without her knowledge and used in one of the most important tools in medical history. But it wasn't until 20 years after her death that her family were ever told how much Henrietta had inadvertently changed medical history. So you get the contrast between these incredible scientific discoveries contrasted with dark questions about our ownership over our own bodies, and particularly how the bodies of people of colour are treated. So that's my English curriculum. Let me know in the comments below if you would sign up for my English class. And as I said, do let me know your own favourite modern classics that you think would have been great to study in a classroom. I will also link here to a playlist of all of our other videos all about classics. And I'll see you next time.